Jack, guess what happened to me yesterday at the hair salon?
What?
The woman cutting my hair asked me, "So, what do you do for work?" And for about 5 full seconds, I completely forgot the English word for my own job.
Wait, were you speaking English with your hairdresser?
Yes, she's from Poland. Her English is honestly better than her Turkish, so we always talk in English. And I just sat there thinking, I work with numbers?
Numbers, that's your job now. You're a number.
Basically, yes. In that moment, I became a number.
Okay, now I have to hear this whole story because I think every single person listening right now has frozen exactly like that.
Welcome back to Rose and Jack Everyday English. We're so happy you're here with us again. I really hope yesterday's episode helped you feel a little more confident. Today is day 11 of our 30-day B1 to B2 challenge. And this is one of my favorite episodes so far because today's topic is talking about your job.
And honestly, this is such a useful topic because if you're learning English speaking, what do you do is one of the very first questions anyone will ask you. At a party, on a plane, at your neighbor's barbecue, it always comes up.
Exactly. So by the end of today's episode, you'll feel much more confident explaining your job in English, even if your job is complicated or hard to translate. This is real, everyday English conversation, the kind you'll actually use.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so back to the salon. My hairdresser asks me this question. Completely normal, completely friendly, and my brain just goes empty. Not because I don't know English words for my job, but because in that split second, I panicked. I think it's because when someone asks about your job, you suddenly feel like you're being tested, even if you're not.
That's such a good point. It's not really a hard question, but it feels like a hard question because there's pressure attached to it.
Right. And here's the funny part. After freezing, I finally said, "I work in an office with paperwork and money things." And she just looked at me and said, "Oh, so you're an accountant?" And I said, "Yes, that word, accountant."
You forgot the word accountant, which is literally your job title.
In my defense, we don't say accountant every day in normal conversation. I say, "I work at the company," or "I do the finance stuff." The actual job title just doesn't come up naturally, so my brain wasn't ready for it.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. I think this happens to learners all the time. You know a word from a textbook, but when someone asks you directly in a real moment, it just doesn't appear.
Exactly, it disappears completely. And then, because I was already embarrassed, I tried to fix it by explaining my whole job in way too much detail. I told her about spreadsheets and monthly reports and something about budgets, and she just kept nodding, probably having no idea what I was talking about anymore.
See, this is something I used to do too, over-explaining. When you're nervous, you think more words will help, but actually it just confuses the other person more.
Totally. Looking back, I should have just said something short and simple, like, "I work in finance, I handle the company's money and reports." Clear, short, done. Instead, I gave her a whole documentary.
Well, my story's a bit different, but it's connected because it's about the exact same fear, the fear of explaining your job to someone new. Mine happened at a barbecue at my new neighbor's house about 2 months after I changed careers.
Oh, right. This is when you left teaching.
Yes, exactly. I was a school teacher for almost 6 years, and then I left to become a freelance web designer working from home. So at this barbecue, my neighbor introduces me to his friend, and his friend asks the classic question, "So, what do you do?"
And what did you say?
Well, in my head, I had this whole explanation ready about how I used to teach and how I slowly built a side hustle designing websites for small businesses, and how eventually that side hustle became my main job. But instead, out loud, I just said, "I'm a teacher." Old habit, I guess.
Wait, so you told him the wrong job?
Basically, yes. And then my neighbor, trying to be helpful, jumps in and says, "Actually, no, Jack changed jobs. He's a web designer now." And there was this awkward silence because now it looked like I didn't even know my own job.
Oh no, that's rough. What did you do?
I just laughed and said, "Sorry, force of habit. I'm still getting used to my new job." And luckily, everyone laughed too, so it turned into a funny moment instead of an embarrassing one. But inside, I was thinking, why can't I explain my own life clearly?
I think that's the real issue, though, right? It's not really about English words. It's about explaining a change, a career change, in a way that makes sense to someone who's meeting you for the first time.
Exactly. And here's the thing. In English, we don't just say our job title, we usually explain a little bit of context too, especially if the job is unusual or if you changed careers recently. So I had to learn how to give a short, clear story, not just one word.
So, what do you say now when someone asks?
Now I say something like, I used to teach at a school, but a few years ago I started designing websites as a side hustle, and it slowly became my full-time job. That's it. Short, clear, and it actually explains the interesting part of my story instead of just confusing people.
I like that a lot because it still tells a story, but it doesn't go on forever.
Right. And I noticed something interesting too. When I explain my job like that, people usually ask a follow-up question like, oh, what made you decide to switch? Or do you enjoy working from home? So it actually starts a real conversation instead of just ending with one word.
That's such a good tip, actually, because with my accountant example, when I say too much information, people don't ask questions. They just nod politely and the conversation kind of dies there.
Exactly. Less is often more, especially in first conversations. Save the details for later once the person is actually curious.
Okay, but I have to admit I don't always agree with the short answer thing. Sometimes I think a bit more detail helps people connect with you faster, especially if your job is boring on paper. Like, I'm an accountant. Sounds boring, but if I add a little bit about what I actually enjoy, it becomes more interesting.
That's fair. I think it depends on the moment. At a party with strangers, short is safer. But with a new coworker or a friend of a friend, a bit more detail can definitely help.
Right, context matters. Actually, this reminds me of something that happened years ago at a networking event, which honestly went even worse than the salon story.
Oh no, tell me.
So this was maybe 5 years ago, before I felt confident speaking English at work events. Someone asked me that my job, and instead of phrasing, I did the opposite. I talked for almost 5 minutes straight, explaining everything about my daily tasks, the software I use, the meetings I attend, literally everything.
5 minutes? About your job? To a stranger?
5 full minutes. And I could see halfway through that the poor man was just waiting for me to stop talking so he could escape and get a drink.
That's rough, but honestly relatable. I think when we're nervous speaking English, sometimes we talk too much because we're afraid of awkward silence.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. I filled the silence with information, way too much information, because stopping felt scarier than talking too much.
What would you do differently now?
Now I'd give a short answer first, then wait to see if the person actually seems interested. If they ask a follow-up question, then I add more detail. If not, I just let the conversation move somewhere else naturally.
That's basically the same lesson I learned from my barbecue story, just from a different direction. Short first, details later, if they're wanted.
Right. And I think that's such an important skill for anyone learning English speaking. Not just knowing job vocabulary, but knowing how much to say and when to stop.
Definitely. And I think there's also a cultural side to this. In some countries, people ask very direct questions about your job, even your salary, and it's totally normal. In other countries, that would feel really rude.
That's true. And since a lot of our listeners are in Asia and Europe, this really depends on where you're from. In some places, how much do you earn is a completely normal question at dinner. In other places, people would be shocked.
Right. So it's useful to know how job conversations usually go in English-speaking countries too, because the expectations can be quite different from what you're used to at home.
Generally, in most English-speaking contexts, people ask what you do, maybe where you work, maybe how long you've done it, but salary questions usually come later, if at all, and only with people you know well.
Good thing to know, because I've definitely seen learners accidentally ask a very direct question, thinking it's polite small talk when actually it makes the other person a bit uncomfortable.
True. So knowing not just the words, but the natural flow of the conversation is honestly just as important.
Completely agree. Okay, actually, before we move to teaching mode, I want to tell you about a client story because I think this one really shows how much I've improved with all this practice.
Yes, tell me. I remember you mentioning something about this a few weeks ago.
So last month, I met a client for the first time, face to face, for a big design project. This client asked me, pretty early in the conversation, how long have you been doing web design? And instead of freezing or rambling, I just said, about 3 years now. Before that, I was a teacher for 6 years, so I bring a bit of a different perspective to my design work, especially for education websites.
Oh, that's smart because it connects your past job to your current job. It makes it sound intentional, not random.
Exactly. And the client actually said, "Oh, that's really interesting. That explains why your designs feel so clear and easy to understand." So instead of being confused about my career change, he saw it as something valuable.
I love that. It shows how the story you tell about your job can actually help you, not just explain you.
Right. And that's something I definitely didn't understand a few years ago. Back then, I saw my career change as something to hide or explain quickly. Now I see it as part of my story, something that makes me interesting.
That's such a good mindset shift. Actually, speaking of family, can I tell you about the hardest job conversation I've ever had? It wasn't a stranger at all. It was my own mother-in-law at Christmas dinner 2 years ago.
Oh, this sounds serious.
It was. So my mother-in-law, she's lovely, but she's very traditional, and she asked me in front of the whole family, "So, Rose, when are you going to get a real job instead of sitting at a computer all day?" And I had to explain, in English, because half the table speaks English better than my language, that my job, sitting at a computer, actually pays quite well and involves real responsibility.
Oh no, how did you handle that?
Well, first I panicked a little because explaining your job is hard enough, but defending your job to family is a completely different level of pressure. I ended up saying, "Actually, I manage the accounts for 3 different departments and I make sure the company doesn't lose money, so it's a pretty real job." I tried to keep my voice calm and friendly, not angry.
That's a really good response, actually. Calm but clear.
Thank you. I was proud of myself afterward, even though my hands were literally shaking under the table. I think what I learned is that sometimes explaining your job isn't about vocabulary at all. It's about confidence and about not feeling embarrassed by what you do, even if someone else doesn't understand it.
That's such an important point, and I think a lot of our listeners probably have jobs that are hard to explain to their parents too. Maybe a job that didn't exist 20 years ago, like social media manager or app developer or content creator.
Exactly. And if that's you listening, honestly, don't feel bad if older family members don't understand your job right away. Just practice a short, confident explanation the same way we're talking about today, and it gets easier every time you say it.
Definitely. And actually, this happened to me too in a slightly different way during a video call with an international client from Japan where there was a small misunderstanding about my job title.
Oh, tell me about this one. I don't think I've heard this story.
So, this client, very polite, very professional. At the start of our call, he says, "So, Jack, you are the manager of the design company, correct?" And I had to gently explain that, no, actually, I'm a freelancer. I work alone. I don't have a company with employees. I just work directly with clients like him.
Oh, I can see how that would be confusing. Freelance work is described so differently in different countries.
Exactly. In some places, freelance work isn't very common. So people assume if you're doing professional work, you must be part of a bigger company with a title like manager or director. I had to explain I'm actually a freelancer, which means I work independently. I don't have a boss and I choose my own clients and projects. He seemed a little surprised, but then genuinely interested and asked me more questions about how freelance work actually works.
That's such a good example of how talking about your job isn't just vocabulary, it's also explaining ideas that might be completely new to the other person.
Right, and I think that's one of the most useful things about practicing these conversations in English, because you're not just repeating words, you're learning how to explain your whole working life clearly to anyone from any background.
Completely agree. Okay, I think we've told quite a few stories now. Mine, yours, family, clients, strangers at parties. I think it's the perfect moment to slow down a little bit and look at some of the useful language we naturally use today.
Actually, before we go into teaching mode, let's do something simple first. Let's just show listeners a plain, practical answer to what do you do? Rose, you go first.
Okay, sure. So imagine someone asks me, what do you do? A simple, natural answer would be, I work in finance. I'm an accountant for a medium-sized company. My main job is checking budgets and preparing monthly reports for the managers. That's it. 3 short sentences, job, company type, main task.
That's perfect, actually, because it answers the question completely, but it doesn't go on forever. Now, let me give my simple version too. If someone asks me, I'd say, I'm a web designer. I work for myself, so I'm a freelancer. I build websites for small businesses, usually shops and restaurants.
Let's try one more example, a different kind of job, just so listeners can hear the pattern again. Imagine someone is a nurse. They could say, I'm a nurse, I work at a public hospital, my main job is taking care of patients and helping the doctors during the day.
Same pattern again. Job, place, main task. And if someone is a student with a part-time job, they could say, I'm a student, but I also work part-time. I work at a coffee shop on weekends. I make coffee and help customers.
That's such a good one, too, because a lot of our listeners are students, not full-time workers yet. And this shows them they can still answer the question naturally, even without a big career.
Exactly. So the real lesson here is simple. You don't need fancy words to talk about your job. You just need a clear pattern. Job title, place, main task, and then you stop and let the other person ask a question if they're interested.
I love that. Plain, practical, and something everyone listening can use today, right after this episode.
Okay, now let's slow down and look at some useful expressions we use naturally today, the kind of language that helps with everyday English conversation about work.
First one, freeze up. When I say my brain froze up, it means I suddenly couldn't think or speak, usually because of nerves. Example, I always freeze up when someone asks me a direct question in a meeting. A common mistake is saying I freeze without up, which sounds a bit unnatural. Freeze up is the natural phrase.
Good one. Next, side hustle. This means extra work you do, usually for extra money, alongside your main job. Example, selling handmade candles online started as a side hustle, but now it's my full-time job. Learners sometimes confuse this with a part-time job, but a side hustle is usually something more personal or creative, not just any part-time work.
Next, force of habit. This means doing something automatically because you're used to it, even if it's not correct anymore. Example, I still write last year's date sometimes just out of force of habit. A common mistake is saying habit force, which is wrong order. Remember, it's always force of habit.
Great point. Next expression, over-explain or over-explaining. This means giving too much information, more than necessary. Example, during job interviews, try not to over-explain your answers. Keep them clear and focused. Learners sometimes just say, explain too much, which is fine too, but over-explain is more natural and commonly used.
Next, follow-up question. This is a question someone asks after your first answer to learn more. Example, after I mentioned my new job, she asked a follow-up question about my daily schedule. Note, it's follow up, not following, when used as an adjective before a question.
Good clarification. Next, networking event. This means a social event where professionals meet to make connections. Example, I met my current business partner at a networking event 3 years ago. Learners often just say professional party, which isn't really correct. Networking event is the natural English term.
Next, career change. This simply means switching from one profession to a different one. Example, after 10 years as a nurse, she made a big career change and became a photographer. Simple, direct, very commonly used in real English conversation.
Last one, bring a different perspective. This means offering a new or unique way of thinking, often based on past experience. Example, having lived in 3 countries, she brings a different perspective to our team discussions. It's a great phrase for interviews because it sounds confident and positive.
These are all expressions you can start using today in real conversations. And honestly, that's the whole point of this podcast, learning through real stories, not boring lists.
Let's look at a few common mistakes B1 learners make when talking about their job in English.
First mistake. Incorrect. I am accountant. Correct. I'm an accountant. In English, we almost always need a or an before a job title. It's a small word, but it's very noticeable when it's missing.
Second mistake. Incorrect. I work in a company since 3 years. Correct. I have worked at a company for 3 years. When talking about something that started in the past and continues now, we use have worked, not simple present, and we use for with a length of time, not since.
Third mistake. Incorrect. I am working there from 2019. Correct. I have been working there since 2019. Since is used with a specific starting point, like a year, while for is used with a duration, like 3 years. Mixing these up is extremely common.
Fourth mistake. Incorrect. My job is to sell products for customers. Correct. My job is to sell products to customers. Small prepositional mistake, but very common. We sell something to someone, not for someone, unless you're doing them a favor.
Fifth mistake, and this one is really common with learners from Asia and Europe, both. Incorrect. I have a job of teacher. Correct. I have a job as a teacher, or simply, I work as a teacher. Job of is not correct in English. Always use as.
Great examples. These are small mistakes, but fixing them makes your English sound so much more natural. Okay, here's today's common challenge. We want to know, what do you do for work or what do you study? Write your answer in the comments in English, using the simple pattern we practiced today. Job title, where you work, and one sentence about your main task.
And if you've ever frozen up or said something embarrassing when someone asked about your job, we really want to hear that story too. Trust us, you are definitely not alone. We've both been there many times.
This is such a great way to practice real English conversation. So don't just read the comments, actually write your own answer, even if it's short and simple.
Thank you, friends, for listening to today's episode. I hope you learned something from it. And more importantly, I hope you feel a little more confident talking about your own job in English now. Remember, you don't need fancy words, just a clear pattern and a bit of confidence.
We're really proud of you for showing up today and for continuing this challenge with us day after day. That consistency is exactly what builds real English fluency over time.
Don't miss tomorrow's episode, day 12 of our B1 to B2 challenge. Subscribe now so you don't fall behind, and make sure notifications are turned on so you never miss a new episode.
See you tomorrow, friends. Keep practicing, and we'll talk again very soon.